What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be talking about recoil control in Call of Duty. This is a video that I really wanted to make because I get a lot of people that are genuinely curious as to why it looks like my gun has less recoil or no recoil when they use the same setup and it's kicking all over the place for them. So hopefully by the end of today, you guys will understand why it looks like my gun has less recoil in a lot of situations and how you guys can control recoil as well. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so the first thing to understand with recoil in Call of Duty is there is an element of randomness to the recoil. It's not like Counter-Strike where the recoil pattern is pretty much like 100% consistent every single time. There are elements of random in this, and therefore the methods of recoil control are never 100% foolproof. There is almost always a general trend that a gun's recoil will follow, so for the VMP for instance, it kicks upwards and to the right, and within that there's a fair amount of spread, so it kind of kicks left and right as it follows that general trend of going vertically and to the right. It's very rare you'll ever get a recoil pattern with a VMP that kicks way left or anything like that. It's almost always going to tug a little bit more to the right. And because of this, we can have a general prediction of where the recoil is going to go. Just keep in mind that there is an element of random and it's not 100% foolproof. So let's get into the recoil patterns for the VMP. First, I'm going to show you what happens when you don't try to control the recoil at all. You simply aim at a point and you hold that trigger down until the magazine's empty. I did two recoil patterns just to give you a better indication of what goes on, because sometimes you do get that one outlier recoil pattern that just looks completely different. Whereas here, if you use two different patterns, it kind of gives you a general indication of what's going to happen. And like I explained, it kicks upwards and a little bit to the right with the VMP. And there's a fair amount of jumping side to side as it goes up in that general pattern. So the first technique to control recoil that a lot of people already know about, this one's pretty straightforward for a lot of people, that is tap firing or burst firing or peppering the trigger, however you want to call it. People call it several different names, but basically don't just hold that trigger down with the full auto. In this scenario, I'm just kind of pulling the trigger for a little bit. Once I see the recoil is starting to really kick up, I will stop firing, let it recenter a little bit, let it come back down, and then hold it for a few more shots. It'll start kicking back up again, let it recenter by stopping yourself from firing, and just continue that until your magazine is empty. This is a great way to control recoil, and it might seem counterproductive because you do have a full auto gun and you want to get all the damage down range as fast as possible. Up close, this is true, but if you have a smaller target or you're shooting at a distance, this can be a very effective technique for controlling recoil. But it's not the only technique for controlling recoil, and next we're going to look at a more advanced technique, and this is more often what you'll see when I see people wondering why my gun doesn't have recoil, because I am firing at full auto but still able to control that recoil quite well. And this is simply trying to counteract the recoil with your right analog stick. You're trying to pull down and to the left, for instance, with the VMP, because it kicks up and right. So if you're constantly putting a little bit of pressure down and to the left while you're firing, it counteracts that recoil to an extent. It's not 100% perfect or anything, but it does keep it down in that general area where I want it to be, and it is quite predictable and easy to do once you really practice it and get used to it. So in this scenario here, you can see my thumb is pulling downwards and just a little bit to the left, and I am compensating as it's going as well. Like I'm keeping an eye on where my gun is kicking to, and I'm pulling wherever it needs to be pulled. So if I get a really strong kick upwards, then I'll pull down a little bit more. Or if it kicks to the right really strong, I'll try and pull a little bit more to the left. You have to constantly adjust as you're firing. It's not like you just hold it in one position and suddenly you have no recoil. So this is a great technique also, but once you actually combine the two techniques together, you can pretty much eliminate most of the recoil of your gun a lot of the times. I mean, some guns, they just have more recoil than others. The VMP is one of those. It does have a fair amount of recoil to it. But if we look at something like the KN-44, for instance, which has kind of moderate recoil, it's a little bit unpredictable recoil as well. If you combine both of these together, you can nearly eliminate the recoil on the KN-44. It's actually an extremely effective way to control recoil on something like the KN-44. So in that first scenario that I just showed you with the KN-44, that was firing without touching the analog stick at all, and that was firing full auto. And now this is what happens when you use both techniques together. So I'm kind of peppering the trigger, but I'm also trying to use my right analog stick to compensate for any recoil. And you can see the recoil pattern is a whole lot tighter when I do this. So the big thing with this, if you do want to practice this, is you need to know the general recoil patterns of each of these guns. And that's very simple to go and test. Just go into a private match with whatever gun you want to work on, and just stand in one spot and shoot a wall with it. And do it a few times because, like I said, there are sometimes those outliers that don't really behave the same way as you normally would expect it. So at least do a few different recoil patterns where you fire a full magazine without touching the analog stick and you fire just full auto. That will give you your general indication of what that gun is going to do, and then just practice. Stand in the exact same spot, shoot at the same distance and everything, and just practice trying to keep that recoil under control by using these two techniques. Once you get good at it for that particular gun, move on to a different gun, and you'll eventually be able to control a lot of the recoil for pretty much any gun in the game. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.